Get me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'd like to call the May 21st, 2019 meeting of the Municipal Committee to order. And first thing on the agenda is roll call.
Alderman Bill Van Buskert.
Present.
Alderman Janet Emerson.
Here.
Alderman Jim Azier.
Here. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Why am I getting a check? Oh,
Alderman Greg Walters.
I'm here too.
Thank you. And Alderman Jarek Ward. I know he's on his way, so.
Excused then for the time being, I guess.
Yes.
Mr. Ward. We do have a quorum. First thing on the agenda is the approval of the November 20th, 2018 minutes. Do I have a motion for approval? Or is there any discussion?
I'll have to abstain as I wasn't here.
Okay.
We don't have
Well-
a quorum, so you wanna-
Maybe
We'll continue those until the
we'll
next
just
meeting.
have to continue.
We'll
yeah,
table it.
we'll-
We can table it to the, whenever Alderman Ward comes
Yeah.
and.
Yeah.
When he gets here, one of you guys can vote for Jim Azier? No, we
No,
won't do that.
we'll table it to the next meeting. So
Okay.
that,
Just kidding. The discussion item this evening is regarding the medical marijuana. And certainly, as far as me personally, as unfortunately, this is a topic that we need to discuss due to the fact that a majority of the voters in our state approved this measure. To me, it's a matter I would prefer not to address, but we really are going to have to do that. It's necessary, kind of like having to change a baby's diaper. It's not a pleasant thing to do, but it's necessary. And for me, that's the category this falls into. So we'll be addressing the issue by asking questions of staff. We have our Assistant City Administrator here, as well as our City Attorney and the other gentleman.
we have with us Chris Gilbert. He's our new Planning and Zoning Coordinator.
Okay, good. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Gilbert. So if you have questions for staff, certainly you can ask those questions. Or if you have comments you would like to make relative to this issue and information you may have regarding how those state statutes would affect us in the laws of our city related to that. There are going to have to be changes made, and certainly in planning and zoning. They will be very involved in it. And we'll have, I don't know what the final ordinance is going to say, but that's going to be drafted sometime in the near future, or at least an initial shot at it. Some of the regulations I don't think are even in from the state as of yet, so we're not sure what all of those are going to be. But so I will ask if anyone has questions for staff, or if you have comments you'd like to make, that you just raise your hand rather than use the lights tonight, and I will recognize you and you can ask those questions. Mr. Walters.
Thank you. The one question I have is, are you guys tracking the applications that are in Raytown proper?
Let me answer that question, and then if you don't mind, let me turn the presentation over to Jennifer so she can walk us through her presentation. And it is slightly different than what you may have heard at the Planning and Zoning. At this current time, the state of Missouri is not confirming or denying if there are applicants interested in the city of Raytown, because not all of them have taken the necessary steps to secure leases or purchases. They've just simply put things under contract. So at this time, we don't have a list to give you to say that they for sure have applied with the state of Missouri for a Raytown. Some of them are applying in 13 or 14 different municipalities, hoping to get one of them. So that's how the state has responded to us, is that, yes, there is interest in your city, but we don't have information to provide you at this time as to the locations of those.
They're being somewhat evasive in saying when they will tell you.
Right. Well, there's a second application phase for commercial
I see that.
applicants, and that's the August 1st date. So I think that's another reason why they haven't given us a lot of detail, because they don't know how many of those pre-apps are going to file the second form and be a full application for consideration or not. So we'll be circling back with them. They've been focused a lot on getting their rules and regs drafted so they can send it to the governor's office yet this week. So we'll circle back with them again to see if they've changed their position on that answer.
You're talking about sellers.
It is distributors, cultivators, and manufacturers. All commercial activities has not been confirmed for us.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay. And you have a presentation for us?
I do.
Okay, continue with that if you would,
I
please.
do. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jennifer Baird. I'm the city attorney. This presentation here is going to look a little familiar if you were at the public forum back on May 2nd. But as Missy has pointed out, what we try to do is add some things based on some of the comments we received after that meeting by residents. What we tried to do is clarify that in the presentation. And so I'm going to make a couple notes, but two things to kind of remember. One is that, Mr. Chairman, you are not alone in the sense of every city right now is going through this process. They're all trying to figure out what type of regulations do we have to put in place. You know, how does that affect our zoning? How does that affect our business licenses? How does that affect our police codes, our, nuisances, all those types of things. So, all the cities right now are really kind of grappling with that idea. And so you are not alone. And the second thing I would just say is that even once the city adopts certain regulations, I would not be surprised if we came back in 6 months, 8 months, maybe even a year, just based on the program and as it's operating, where we figure out, hey, this doesn't work for us, or this may work for us differently, and we may have to make some changes and tweaks. So with that, this is just basically a timeline with regards to health and senior services. This is really what Amendment Number 2, which was passed by the voters last year, it became effective on December 6th. And basically what Amendment 2 allows is for people to possess and use medical marijuana. It's legal to do that. So this is what the department, this is their timeline they're working on, which is kind of why we're trying to do certain things in a certain time frame. So, for example, under the amendment, the next deadline that's coming up is June 4th. That's when they should have all their rules and the regulations finalized. And so once they have put out some draft rules and regulations, which we have, and we've tried to incorporate that as we're looking at the city's ordinances. We're looking at that to see, what does need to change. And again, once the final regulations come out, we'll definitely, be looking at, are there additional changes we need to make, which, probably will be the case. So then from June 4th, then the department is going to start accepting patient and caregiver identification cards. That's July 4th. So people that want to be able to use medical marijuana, they're going to start applying July 4th. And typically, it's a 30-day turnaround with regards to the department approving those applications. Then the department will begin accepting applications for cultivation, manufacturing, dispensaries, testing, so on. It's actually August 3rd. And under the amendment, it says that the department has to either consider, approve, or deny those applications. They have 150 days to do that, which puts us out to December 31st. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to take all 150 days to approve those, but that's just kind of the time frame they're working in. And so from our perspective, what we're trying to do is, obviously, we have some proposed changes to the code, which we're trying to finalize and take. And when I say code, I mean the zoning ordinance, the zoning code. And so we've started making some revisions, which we'll take to the Planning Commission on June 6th. And we've also set up another date, June 13th, as a possible second public meeting date. Within, if it goes in that timeline, if they need a second date, then we'd bring forward to the Board of Aldermen July 2nd and July 16th would be the days we'd bring back for hearing by the board on those changes to the zoning code. So again, what the amendment allows is for cities to provide reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. So there's a lot of things you can't do, but those are the things the cities can do. So what we have here is, what we can't do is regulate who's the qualifying patient or caregiver. That's totally in the hands of the state. We have no, if someone has a card that says they are patient or caregiver, then we have no authority to regulate that. We also can't prohibit, expressly prohibit these types of facilities. On the other hand, we can't enact laws that are so restrictive that it effectively prohibits these types of businesses. So we'll talk a little bit about what kinds of regulations we may be looking at, which are distance regulations. And so sometimes you can effectively limit the numbers if your restrictions are too restrictive, if that makes sense. So here's some things that we think that can be regulated and that you may be seeing, an ordinance that comes before you. These are possible things that you might see is maybe a limitation on the time of operation. And we kind of have those things already for like the sale of alcohol. We have time limits. And so that's certainly something that we believe can be added. Place. Again, looking at the city, where are some places, where do we see these types of businesses and locations? Where's the most appropriate part for the different types of facilities? Under the amendment, it talks about distances between daycares, schools, and churches. So what we really need to figure out, and what's not clear from the regulations, is how is that measured? How's that distance measured? Is it door to door? Is it property line to property line? There is a strange regulation about walking distance, and it talks about walking on the sidewalk and turning, and it's really a convoluted measurement. So
that's in the state
yes,
statute.
and this is part of the state. Yeah, so the state is looking at this measurement. So again, once we know for sure what that regulation is, it will probably be something we would include. We also think that you could add in there distances from other similar types of facilities. Again, you can't regulate necessarily the number of facilities. However, if by putting in these distance or measurement, regulations, that in effect, that basically, that is what you're doing, is limiting that number. But, so we need to be careful that we don't make the regulations so strict, like you can't be within 75,000 feet of another similar facility, because that would basically prohibit something that's allowed. The other thing, some other things are odor. With regards to marijuana, it has a distinct odor, and so what kind of ventilation, that might come in the form of building code amendments. But also, what's an objective standard of odor? Because if you think about other things in our code like noise ordinances, there's a way to measure that. I don't know if there's a way to measure odor. And, how do you, what smells bad to one person may not smell bad to another. I just don't know. That's just something to really think about. We did talk about reasonable hours of operation, buffer requirements. So thinking about, these types of uses and what zoning districts, and if they're near residential uses, what type of buffer. You'll probably see some traffic and circulation type regulations coming before you, signage and lighting, parking, building code, security. This is one that I know the state regulations are looking into and have addressed somewhat, but I think there will be more regulations coming out with regards to security. So the other thing, kind of moving on, and this is just more or less, this presentation is more about issue spotting and identifying. But again, understanding that we're working on the zoning code right now and those changes. We're going to address some of these through this presentation, a few other areas of the code that may have to be addressed. So that's why you're seeing some other parts. But with regards to the law, it basically says that there's no additional taxes that can be imposed on the sale of medical marijuana other than there's a 4% sales tax that the state imposes on the sale. And that 4% goes back to the state. However, the city can still collect its local sales tax as well as its local use tax on this. You just can't impose additional.
No additional tax.
Right. Right. And as well as there can be no additional license fees except for whatever you would charge for a business license.
So I do have a question
Sure.
relative to that. You said the local taxes that we have in place would apply
Correct.
to that facility as well.
Correct.
What if the tax was increased? Say we have a certain percentage of sales tax that the city collects.
Right.
And that is approved by the voters to increase it. Would that apply to those facilities then?
You know, that's a great question. And, possibly, and that's something I've not looked into. I'll definitely take a look because I can definitely see one of those facilities coming back and saying, wait a minute, we aren't subject to the additional tax. We may be subject to whatever tax was in place at the time, but no additional tax.
Right. And
Yeah.
certainly any other business would be,
Any other business
but
would be,
this
yeah.
is regulated in a different way and has specific statutes
Yeah.
that apply to it. So,
Yeah, it's a great question.
Okay.
And I don't know that there's going to be a lot of answers, I'll be honest with you, with regards to this, but again, because it's so new for us. But the good thing is other states have actually, they've had medical marijuana regulations in place, and that's always a good place to start is what other states are doing and what works for them. So I'll make a note of that. So you can charge the business license fee to operate the business. One of the things I'll just note for you is that those business licenses are only good for the sale, any business that's selling the product. You can't require a business license for like a cultivation facility or testing facility because as a fourth-class city, the city, by state statute, there's a statute out there that lists all the types of businesses that the city can impose a business license on. And if it's not specifically listed, then you can't charge a business license for them. So that's why if you're selling of products, that falls within the general merchant definition of that statute. So if that makes sense. So on this one, you can require the business license. And one thing I wanted to note here was that this city has an occupancy permit process. So all businesses have to follow this. So there's an occupancy permit that must be obtained prior to the business license. So just because we have a process in place, doesn't mean that we have to treat them differently than our other businesses per se. So in addition, I believe you can require a special use permit or a conditional use permit. That kind of goes back to the zoning, in certain districts. So the amendment also talks about public consumption. It prohibits public use of marijuana and driving under the influence of marijuana. So, some things maybe to look at is how do we define what's public? Is sitting in a parking lot, not driving anywhere, is that considered, public? If you're consuming or smoking medical marijuana. So just some things to think about. And, how do cities enforce the consumption, especially if it's not being smoked, but, consumed in other ways, either through the oils or, something edible. Because, and the last thing just to note is that marijuana, under the federal regulations, is still, it's still an illegal drug. So you've got the federal level that says, look, there's no exception. Marijuana is a controlled substance and it's illegal. But then you've got the states that are passing these rules and regulations that say you're allowed to have medical marijuana. So, we'll have to figure those things out as well. Employee policies, and I won't go into too much detail unless you'd like to go into more detail. I will just say that those are things, again, we're going to be looking at and probably bringing back, for approval, making sure that certain positions certainly can't have medical marijuana permit and possess a firearm. It's illegal, and just some of these other things that we can address. A couple of other things, sale of other products. So, with regards to medical marijuana and how does it get ingested, there is a state statute out there that basically says that possession of paraphernalia is still a crime, and that head shops, that's basically any shop that's selling drug paraphernalia, they're all illegal. And so, so you've got those statutes out there that say it's illegal, but yet you have a regulation or constitutional amendment that says medical marijuana is legal, and you can smoke it, ingest it, however. So signage, that's something else that we'll be looking at. Most states prohibit the use of marijuana in the name or even showing a copy of the leaf. Missouri has not acted on that, so I don't know if there'll be some regulations, coming, in the June 4th regulations, if there'll be anything in there about signage. There is a case that came out in 2015. It was Reed versus City of Gilbert, and basically that case says, look, you can't regulate signage by content unless, you can. There's a strict scrutiny test you have to pass, and most cities wouldn't be able to pass that strict scrutiny test. So in essence, you can't regulate, signage by its content. So that kind of just makes it more challenging. There's also going to be some issues with regards to, again, we're going to have to look at our ordinances with regards to nuisances and offenses and take a look at that. Some of this may just be a decision by our police staff of, if someone has a medical marijuana permit and they're caught with paraphernalia, then, they don't issue a ticket, even though the paraphernalia is by state statute still, illegal, if that, makes sense. So some of that's going to be a little bit of a discretion through our police, but that's something that we'll work with the police department on and in identifying those issues and trying to address that. But that's just something that, again, you're going to be seeing some regulations, some changes in the code coming forward, and so just want you to be kind of aware of those things. And so there's absolutely lots of different criminal issues. Again, I won't go through everything there. The last thing just to maybe address, and this is kind of going back to more of the zoning issue, is how do we handle, secondhand smoke, thinking about multifamily residential dwellings, about common areas, institutional housing, does that smell, carry, and how do we address that? One thing that we had considered is possibly on these multifamily residential areas or even institutional housing, some of that is by contract. These are residents, that are more than likely renting the property. So if the property owner, the landlord, did not want medical marijuana, to be used in its facility, is that possible? Is that a possibility that they could regulate medical marijuana that way through their rental agreements? So anyway, so those are just some things that we are looking at, and some of this will be addressed and coming forward to you with regards to just various sections of the code. So with that, I know that was very quick, down and dirty version there, but I guess I'm more interested to know what kind of questions, comments, that you have.
Mr. Walters?
Thank you. And in our role up here on this committee, are we to help give you direction?
Absolutely.
Good. Okay, one thing's as far as the taxation goes of the of the facilities that are in the business of selling. I'm not that familiar with those that are cultivating and so forth, but in the selling, I think that we should treat this as any other controlled substance and therefore use the guidelines that we have for those who sell alcohol for licensing and for selling of the controlled substance.
Meaning, I mean, so,
The same license fees that we charge
Oh,
a liquor store.
I gotcha.
But
If they're consuming it on premises, then same thing you would charge a bar.
Okay, but the city's ordinances follow state statute on that. And the state statute on medical marijuana says that we can only charge the local sales tax. So we can't charge the local sales tax on that plus the liquor license fee. That's what we have, and the state allows us to charge that extra liquor
Well, it
license.
says that no additional taxes can be imposed on the sale of medical marijuana other than sales tax, but this is not a tax, it's a fee. And it's the same, it says that we can charge the same fees that we do other businesses. For instance, you mentioned an occupation license. That's a fee. You have
We don't charge a fee for occupational permits. It's part of the business license process.
Okay, so you have a business license that you charge for.
Right.
Okay,
And-
this is a controlled substance, just as alcohol is. Why can't we charge that? I really don't see the difference. Some people may even consider alcohol to be medicinal.
It's a valid point with regards to, and forgive me, I've not seen your business license regulations with regards to, is there like a fee schedule that's attached?
Yes,
And
ma'am.
And is it business specific, or does it, I guess I'm,
Not within our codes, but they have approved, Board of Aldermen have approved a fee schedule. And the fee schedule for liquor follows the state in that the state issues a liquor by the drink, a packaged liquor license.
Okay.
A special event permit. We have all of those spelled out, and those over and above the business license for a liquor store.
Okay,
Over and
gotcha.
above a business license for a convenience store.
Gotcha.
That's in addition to. And then on a smoke shop, we have the cigarette tax.
Okay. I apologize. I just wanted to be a little bit more clear because some ordinances write it so that it's just hey, we charge $25 to apply for a business license, and that's what it is. Or some cities will do kind of what you're saying.
We have for the
separate it.
general business operation is a gross receipts business license. And then on top of that, to sell the alcohol, whether it's the bar or the store, we follow the state's liquor license that are issued every June.
Got
That's
it.
on top of that.
Okay.
Question.
Okay.
A question regarding that. Do we also have a special license for those that sell liquor on Sundays?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that would be another one, if such a facility were to open up. And the argument here is there's a burden put on the community by having this type of operation there. I realize that there may be people who may get better or be able to ease their pain with it, but there is burden, certainly more training for our police officers. It also puts them somewhat of a pickle, as you pointed out, if somebody's caught ingesting marijuana using an illegal device like a bong or something like that.
Well, and one difference I'll just say is that there's no public consumption. So there's not going to be someone smoking it in a store, going into a store and dispensary and smoking it.
Can they
It's
smoke
not
it in their
gonna-
home?
Just in their home, right?
Can they smoke it in their yard? Yeah. As far as the odor from marijuana, I think we should use the same norms that we use for tobacco, except Raytown's pretty lax in that. We might consider changing that, too, at the same time.
Gotcha.
I believe as far as the enforcement with law enforcement, to whatever extent the state will allow us to enforce it, I believe that we should adopt that into our code. So do you need a motion for that?
I'm just taking notes, and I don't believe that there's a motion needed, but
No, sir, we're just getting your direction and your input so that we can incorporate those things or research further if we have the latitude to do what you're asking us to do, such as the additional taxation on selling of controlled substances, if that is allowed by Amendment 2. We need to research that because I've gotten other legal opinions that wasn't allowed, so we'll research that and make sure we address it.
It doesn't make sense that if you can have additional taxes on cigarettes, which we do, that you wouldn't have it on another substance that you inhale into your lungs. So I think there's some very strong arguments for that, and I think it'd be good for the city as far as that goes, at least economically.
Right. And there's specific statutes, though, that do address that specifically, so that's maybe why it's different, and they just haven't done it here. So.
Okay, well,
yeah,
thank you.
big-
So I think those are things that our staff and our city attorney certainly can look into and find some answers to those questions.
Absolutely.
So that some of that could be incorporated into the initial draft of the ordinance. Do you
Yes,
have a comment for us?
thank you.
Ms. Emerson.
Okay, you're going to have senior housing like Elliott Place and some of those. And I'm sure some of those people will have their cards so they can use that. So that might be something you should think about, because I'm sure that's going to come up big time. And as far as the odor, on a dispensary, there would be no odor because they don't open the packages. So that, and you said something about distances from other facilities, but you didn't say what other facilities.
Meaning like facilities. I mean, it's kind of how you define, how the city would define that. If you mean, from dispensary to cultivating facility, testing facility, if you're looking at that, or you're looking at distances between dispensaries, it could be numerous things with regards to the distance.
And I wonder because, the federal law says, you can't do that. I just wonder what's going to happen, when the state says you can and the feds say you can't.
I read a Department of Justice memo that was done with regards to the marijuana, and what they basically said is, from their perspective, they are not aiming for people with a valid, medical marijuana license. They're not. That's not what they're trying to enforce. They're trying to enforce illegal drug use, and so they at least made it sound like that was something that they were not going to necessarily be knocking on doors and trying to, target certain people. But then again, it was just a memo. Don't know exactly, with regards to how forceful that really is. So,
Well, also, I was kind of taken aback when they said there's going to be 25 agents going around the state, when they
Yeah.
only have 5 for alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
yeah, that was
Alcohol, people drink and drive all the time, and I don't know that marijuana affects that greatly, because most people stay home and smoke that. So
Right.
I was just, that kind of
Yeah.
shocked me.
yeah. Good point.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Well, the fact is, a lot of people don't stay home and smoke. I work for a rental car company, and I can tell you that many of our vehicles come back, and the smell, you can smell it from outside the vehicle, and if you open the vehicle up, it's very, very strong, and it takes a lot to get that odor out of it. So certainly that's a problem. And if someone is doing that in a residence next to you, I can guarantee if you have your windows open, it's going to affect you, and it could be rather strong. You're talking about our ordinances and how we can, mold our ordinances as we go along, and we may have to do that, because I think people sometimes forget that these things aren't etched in stone. We can always go back and change them as we need to, related to situations that we feel like we need to address or change in those ordinances. We have, other than as long as we follow the guidelines of the state statutes and they're not in conflict with them, certainly we can go make those changes as we go along. So whatever we do initially, may, as you said, may have to be changed down the line. Anyone else like to ask questions? Certainly, Mr. Ward.
I apologize for getting late. I've been on the road from Topeka since 4 o'clock, and of course, you never hit the worst traffic jams of your life when you have no place to be and a full tank of gas, so. And I'll ask our city attorney, was that I believe it's called the Robertson memo, is that the memo you're referring to where they said that no federal funds will be used to enforce the marijuana use that's legal under state law?
I don't know for sure, to be honest with you. It was doing a lot of different research, and it just popped up, and so.
I think that's the name,
that
and
the
it's
name
also
of it?
been enacted, I believe, as a budget provision for the last 3 or 4 years, and of course, it's not codified, but it, in the normal statutes, but it is a budget provision. And of course, we need to remind people that just because the federal government says something is illegal doesn't mean that a sovereign state like Missouri has to make it illegal. There's a principle called the anti-commandeering prohibition or concept that the federal government cannot commandeer the law enforcement and executive actions of the state to accomplish some federal goal. Now, they can incentivize you, and they've done that in other actions, but just because it's illegal under federal law doesn't mean the state of Missouri has to spend one penny to enforce federal law. So I wouldn't get too excited about that. I don't think that there's any interest in the federal government from picking this fight with Missouri when we've got states like Colorado that, not only have recreational legal, but they had just legalized magic mushrooms. So we're probably not number one on the list. In terms of worrying about the distances to other facilities, I'm quite frankly just not concerned about that. I think it's very unlikely that Raytown would get 2 dispensaries. Quite frankly, I'll be pleased if we get 1, but I'm just not sure we need to put a lot of effort into worrying about that until it appears that that could be an issue. Mr. Walters, as to the tax issue, I believe the constitutional provision is quite clear that aside from normal sales tax, I don't believe we're allowed to pass any sort of additional tax on this.
That says it both ways.
Pardon me?
In her presentation, it basically speaks both ways.
Okay. I'm just referring to Article 14. I don't believe there's any leeway there, but certainly it doesn't hurt for them to take another look at that.
There was something, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I did want to continue with that thought about following the same tax and fees that we can.
Are you okay with Mr. Walters?
I'll yield for a minute or
yielding to
two,
him?
as long as
Okay.
I can have it back.
Go ahead, Mr. Walters.
And that would be on the prohibition. I don't agree with Mr. Ward. I think that we should have the same prohibitions that we have other controlled substances. So if it's a broad guideline, but it's one that would be easy to figure out.
Well, and I will just say it's not a matter of what we should or would desire. It's a matter of what the state constitution, and if it prohibits it, it doesn't have to make sense. It's just the law is an expression that an attorney friend of mine is fond of saying. So that policy decision may have been taken out of our hands by the voters.
Maybe.
And I'm not saying I disagree or agree with you. I'm trying to state the obvious here. Now, personally, I support the general concept, and I think we need to recognize a couple important facts. First of all, that roughly 74% of the Raytown voters voted for this. This is not some fringe or marginal issue. This is something that 75 out of 100 of our voters went to the polls and voted for, and that each dispensary is estimated to be likely to produce $4 to $6 million in annual sales, producing $150,000 to $170,000 in additional tax revenue for this city. So I welcome it. I would like to point out that a lot of the concern seems to be focused on people smoking cannabis or medical marijuana. And while that may indeed be a delivery route, I think everybody needs to be cognizant that there will be many other methods for that. In fact, smoking may be one of the less common methods. And so there will be ways for people in the assisted living homes to utilize the medicine without smoking. So I don't know if that gives us flexibility or if it just means that perhaps that can be regulated by the actual living facility themselves. And finally, I'd like to point out that this is kind of a unique situation, and I think unique even to a lot of the medical marijuana states, in that This is a constitutional provision in Missouri. It's not a matter of statute. There are still on the books several state statutes that appear to conflict, but they have to yield to the Constitution. And I think as a local government, we need to keep our eye on the big picture, and the big picture is make sure our city ordinances don't conflict with our state's constitution. Thank you.
Anyone else have any comments or questions for legal staff or for Missy or for Mr. Gilbert?
Yes, I had
Go ahead.
a statement. I know in Colorado, they do have the marijuana that, for medicine that you can rub on. And apparently, there is no smell to that. And it's pretty widely used there. So that's also another way to go if you know they have facilities that, for the aged that need that kind of thing. And then there's drops, all kinds of stuff that you can deviate from the smoking. Thank you.
And Mr. Ward made a good point when he was talking about possible revenue from this, but that's what really this is all about. It's money driven. And so people need to understand that. Of course, they went in Colorado. It started out with medical marijuana, went to total legalization, and as he stated, even other drugs now have been legalized, certainly in Denver. I think, I'm not sure if that's statewide relative to the mushrooms, but it is in Denver. But there, and I think probably will happen here in Missouri, the course will probably be the same course that will happen here. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of, in Colorado, there was huge amounts of outside money that came from outside of the state to promote that because it's a money-driven thing. And that probably will happen here in Missouri as well. So I think we need to expect those kind of things to happen. Anyone else have any questions or comments? Go ahead.
Well, didn't want to get into a debate about it tonight, but it says that no license fees except regular business license, only on the sale of products, not for cultivation facilities, testing facilities, et cetera. To me, that says if you have a regular business that has a controlled substance, you can tax it, just like you do other controlled substances. And I think it needs to be explored. I don't think we should shut the door on that possibility because we have a revenue source there that should be, if this is going to be as wildly popular as everybody seems to act like it is going to be, we'll be rich, at least the city will. So I just think that maybe we ought to keep that door kicked open a little bit and see if we can take advantage of it.
Okay, we do have a limited amount of time that because of the fact that we do have a regular board session coming up at 7 o'clock. Did someone have their light on? Okay. The names don't coincide with the people here, so it's a little difficult to know who that is. Okay, thank you, Jim. He is here. All right. If no one else has any other questions, and if staff doesn't have any other information for us, Missy, do you have
I just wanted to touch
some
on the
additional
timeline again. The packets for planning and zoning will go out at the end of next week. It is our anticipation that staff will give to all the Board of Aldermen a copy of what we have sent to the Planning and Zoning Commissioner, so that you can start looking at it as well. We will be putting a memo on it saying this is subject to change depending on what the state has issued on June 4th, because we are writing with what we know today. Planning and Zoning will have its first hearing on June 6th, and then if they have decided that they need to have yet a second meeting, that will be on the June 13th, Thursday night. Talking with your chair, he has decided that we will have a special called 5 o'clock municipal committee to start discussing amongst yourselves what it is planning and zoning passed out, and also the drafts that you have there, and what modifications we have that have resulted from planning and zoning's discussions. So as a committee, you can give staff additional comments. In trying to be as efficient as possible, we did go ahead and do the public notice, so that the first reading of ordinance changes could be heard. Public hearing on that could start on the June 18th meeting. So you will have a municipal meeting at 5 to 6:45. We will also have the first reading of any ordinance changes that planning and zoning have recommended, just so that we can have yet another public hearing for the people to testify before the Board of Aldermen at the same time. And then the second one is noticed up for the July 2nd Board of Aldermen meeting. If we need to continue it, we can continue, but we wanted to be so that we had enough time for you all and the Planning and Zoning Commission to have public hearings on this and adopt everything necessary before the August 1st date, so that those who are filing their second part of their dispensary, cultivating, and manufacturing applications would know if they're properly zoned in Raytown, should they want to move forward with that application in a timely manner. So that's kind of the outline for you, and I realize we're back to back, but that was the way it works out for us schedule-wise. And if you have questions about that, you can talk to the staff on the timeline, and we can address those accordingly. So
We're certainly going to have, there's specifications as to when the timeline needs to be for this. It's going to be pretty tight to get that done. There are a lot of things that have to happen, as Missy said, relative to planning and zoning. And certainly we will make every effort to get the information back before our committee. That June 18th date should give us an opportunity to look at the draft of that ordinance prior to the first reading before the full Board of Aldermen. And certainly there will be a second reading in 2 weeks of that ordinance. So there will be ample opportunity to make amendments. And Mr. Ward, do you have a comment?
Just had a quick request of Ms. Wilson, and I don't know what the protocol is for this, but I know we received some criticism for not allowing the public to ask questions at the last Planning and Zoning Committee meeting. And so if there's any way that we could allow the public to participate in that and offer their feedback, I think that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
the planning and zoning will be a public hearing, so there will be time for the public to weigh in on the drafts that are out there. That was intentional for us not to have public dialogue. We need the planning and zoning commissioners to have their own time to ask the attorneys and get better footing before we brought changes for consideration. So that was the purpose for that presentation. And it was noticed as simply an informational meeting. We were not in any violation of state statute because we did not notice it as a public hearing. So just wanted to clarify that because we've received similar comments about that.
No, I didn't mean to suggest we were, but
Okay.
the appearance perhaps was that we didn't do everything we could, so thank you.
Now, would there be a public hearing when that draft of the ordinance, or the ordinance comes before the full board?
Yes, sir.
There will
It will
be.
be a public hearing on both readings.
So that will certainly give citizens ample opportunity to ask questions or to make comments, at least, and give their thoughts. And there will be two opportunities for that as well, since there will be two readings of that ordinance. Well, we are going to run out of time, so I ask for
Make a motion to adjourn.
to adjourn. Very good. Second by me. Ms. Emerson seconded that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you for your time.
All ayes. I didn't hear Mr. Walters. He said aye. Okay, I guess we're all in favor.